Is it possible to adapt video games to other media? HBO's The Last of Us is probably the first to do it well, with both audience and critical acclaim. The opposite happened several times. For decades, developers created games based on movies, TV series, and other media, some direct adaptations and some just inspired by them. There were spectacular failures, of course, but adaptations helped pave the way for success in the video game industry. But the other way around? Don't get me wrong, Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter did okay in the 90s. However, even these moderate successes in the box office were not regarded as very good. Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, Assassin's Creed, great video game franchises failed in the big and small screens. There must be something wrong with adapting video games. But then, why did The Last of Us work so well? Maybe the reason is The Last of Us already had cinematic ambitions from the start. Or maybe HBO was particularly wise in how to create this adaptation. Are there lessons to be learned from this? More specifically, how does this matter for video game design? Is it a blueprint or lightning in a bottle? There will be spoilers for all The Last of Us in this video. For the game, the sequel, the DLC, the TV series, even the podcasts. Are there people who care about podcast spoilers? Well, let's be safe anyway. First, what do I mean with cinematic ambitions? Perhaps it is obvious to those who played The Last of Us, but it is about presentation. I'm not talking only about the graphics and motion capture. Those are excellent, but presentation encompasses everything, from writing to voice acting, from camera angles and cutscenes to the pacing of the story. Everything you associate with good audio-visual media. It was no surprise that Neil Druckmann, the director of the game, was also a very competent director for one episode in the TV show. Presentation is a big reason why they did a remake only a few years after a remaster that still looks very good. I mean, it is also a good cash grab, and I guess porting the game to PC provided enough justification. I like the remake for a minor reason. To make it visually consistent with Part 2. Guess what? Now this guy's scrubs are really blue, not green. Thank God, I was so angry at that for no particular reason. I mean, that was the reason why Part 2 was so controversial. We all know that, right? Nothing to do with anything else. Okay, let's move on. Naughty Dog had a clear goal. Not only look like a movie, but feel like a movie, and a good one at that. Other games already have tried to accomplish such cinematic ambitions, but only a few succeeded, arguably none to the level of The Last of Us. In general, they were held up by a lack of understanding of what makes for good storytelling, particularly their terrible writing. It is like Tommy Wiseau wrote these games.
You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
But why would video games aspire to that comparison to movies? Every time a new technology is developed, art can change. More often than not, it will take time until these changes are accepted and refined. In the beginning, cinema was not considered particularly artful, with many critics considering it only a source of entertainment. Maybe it sounds familiar. As decades passed, movies were gradually recognized as a significant format to express meanings beyond mere pastimes. Similarly, TV series got more serious attention over time, and HBO was particularly important in that process. Video games are going through a similar process of acceptance, but it's still difficult for many to consider games as art. Even some gamers resist the idea, as they play games just as entertainment, for fun. Getting this kind of recognition is important for the industry for many reasons. One of them was to assure status of protected speech, to prevent games to be banned due to violence and stuff. Another, no less important, is to increase the market. If games are more than just toys for kids, they can capture a much larger portion of the population. Movies also had to figure that out. It is very expensive to produce a movie or a video game. Reaching the largest audience possible is mandatory to be profitable. And the best way to get millions of people interested is to use the medium to tell stories. It became an essential part of cinema's viability. People do not want to spend money to watch or play artsy experiments. It was natural for video games to follow the footprints of movies and try to improve the narrative side of the craft. The Last of Us was not the first attempt, but it was a rare success in doing so. It achieved the goal of appealing to mature audiences with good writing, good characters, good storytelling. Not just good for a video game, but good, period. And all of that is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is so good that adapting it to TV was almost seamless to the most part. The most important dialogue is identical.
Any sudden moves and I put one right between your eyes. Ditto for buddy boy over there.
The plot has only minor modifications, and the quality is good enough that you could believe this was initially intended for TV, not for a game. It probably convinced a lot of people that video games are indeed art. On the other hand, some things were sacrificed. And I'm not talking about how the TV show had a lot less combat, much fewer infected, etc. Even without all that, it is very faithful to the original game. And comparing the two is a way to understand what gets lost in translation, and why, in my opinion, game designers should not try to replicate the cinematic part of the formula, because the reason The Last of Us is a great video game is not the cinematic ambitions, but interactivity. You see, every art form has something special about it. This is not an original take. Literature explores language in depth. Music is based on sound, sculptures appeal to our sense of volume, and so on. Movies combine many of these, but they have something distinctive, the illusion of movement. It is in the name, movie. And video games have interactivity. Gameplay is what is special, and what should be the most important factor for video games as an art form. Let's see an example. Movies use camera tricks to convey meaning. Video games can also do that, but they also need to account for the player. At a given point, Joel gets trapped and upside down. This is a memorable moment, not because the perspective in itself was telling something, but because it affected gameplay. You had to aim and infect it in an unexpected way. It is an interesting gameplay challenge. Not surprisingly, this scene did not make the TV show, because its strength was in forcing the player into a different perspective, not merely presenting it. Some players did not like The Last of Us because the gameplay loop was not as engaging for them. At its core, I agree. It is a basic survival third-person shooter. It does not have any innovative mechanics. Levels are gorgeously presented, but do not have that much going for them. Part 2 is a much better game in that regard, but I believe even the most annoying critics like myself should strive to evaluate a game based on what the developers try to accomplish. And as a matter of fact, Naughty Dog was not trying to replay Uncharted. They were focusing on characters and story. More on the characters actually, the plot is not that interesting. And characters require at least 3 things. 1. Write them well. 2. Understand their motivation and role in the story. And more importantly, number 3, perspectives. We are players, not viewers or readers or listeners. We do all these things, but first and foremost, we are playing, and understanding perspective is paramount. In gameplay, most of the perspective is from Joe, but we also play with two other characters, his real daughter Sarah and his surrogate daughter Ellie. The transitions from one character to the other happen between traumatic moments. The fungus outbreak in the beginning of the game shifts you to the character who will try to protect his daughter and fail, making you part of the trauma. When Joe is unconscious and you play as Ellie without knowing what happened, it creates suspense. And right at the end of the game, we'll talk more about that later. The Last of Us Part 2 played with perspectives the whole time, changing back and forth from Ellie to Abby, from the present to the past. It was clumsier at it, also more ambitious, but I digress. Maybe in another video. Changing perspectives is not the only thing Naughty Dog controls. The story is linear and there are no real options on how to progress. No matter what you do, Joel will get stranded with Ellie. They will be ambushed in Pittsburgh, he'll get injured at the university, Ellie will get captured by cannibals, she will kill their leader, etc, etc. More importantly, you cannot decide if Joel will rescue Ellie or not. In the end, the game even forces you to kill a doctor, like he's the final boss. And he kind of is. Many players feel like they are not really playing, but acting instead. On the one hand, this looks like a waste of interactivity. Why not get a choice at the end? Or some choices along the way? So many games do that, with branching paths and different dialogue and decisions. It would be interesting to see how many players would decide to spare the Fireflies and not rescue Ellie. I know I would never let her die. These guys are clearly incompetent. They could not develop a vaccine even with a dozen Ellies.
Shit. Oh no. He did me.
But some people have faith in humanity, I guess. But not having a choice forces you to act as Joe, creating a dialogue between his actions and you. You have to confront his choices as you perform them. The very fact that video games are comfortable with violence helps us in understanding this is not a choice. You must save Ellie. It can never be an option. It is imperative for this character, and he will do it. And you will be his accomplice. And do not try to cop out by stealthing your way to the surgery room. At the end, you will kill this guy dead, no mercy, in blue scrubs.
Fucking animal!
Carrie, shut the hell up!
But this is not what is brilliant about perspectives. That comes later, when in the final playable scene you are not Joel anymore. You play as Ellie, and she does not know exactly what happened, but she knows something is rotten. This shift in perspective makes the player an accomplice in Joel's murders, but a recipient of his lie. So you can relate to both characters and the ambivalent feelings they have at the end. A lesser game would only have it as a final cutscene, but even a simple walking section can make interactivity work in favor of meaning. The issue I have with The Last of Us is that these moments are usually isolated. Ordinary gameplay is still shooting infected or humans, or looking for ladders, and only a handful of moments in that gameplay loop can be described as meaningful. The mechanics are too limited to create artful moments. Exploration can reveal some Easter eggs in the environment, like the story of Ish in the notes found in Pittsburgh, but not much that takes interactivity to the forefront. However, there is enough that a comparison to the TV show allows us to see the potential of video games to do more, to create art. Why not start with the hardest part of this argument then? Let's consider the third episode, almost universally acclaimed for showing the love story of Bill and Frank, the biggest deviation from the game. It might shock TV-only fans that in the game, Frank actually abandoned Bill, stole a car battery from him, and left a note telling how much he hated him. Nothing further from this.
on the strawberries. Right.
As a narrative, this looks very difficult to gamify. Even the best side quests in the best games would be pressed to include some real action, limiting the kind of stories that can be told. There is an action scene in the episode, but the impact of it is dramatic, something that is better suited to the passive screen. So many moments in the series come from the game's cutscenes, which are not interactive. The Last of Us could not trust the player to just act appropriately in all of these moments, so they are presented passively. This could be a good example to show the limitations of video games, how cinematic ambitions are misguided. But I do not think it is the best example, because every medium is limited, and usually trying to get around the limitation creates a different medium. For example, literature is language, it does not use pictures.
Can you read this? There's no pictures.
But what if it does? Then we have graphic novels, with a different set of possibilities and limitations. Cinematic ambitions are not wrong because video games are limited. They are wrong because they abandon their possibilities. Let's check episode 7. Adapting the Left Behind DLC, they were very careful not to include the long sections of mall wandering and combat happening in the present of the game. It is one of the funniest sections of gameplay in The Last of Us because you can pit infected against human enemies. It makes the level maybe too easy, sure, but it is enjoyable as a piece of tomfoolery. The TV episode is focused on the past and how Ellie and her girlfriend Riley got infected. The gameplay structure here is different from what the main game had most of the time. You have some freedom to explore the environment in complete safety. You are incentivized to play with things just like Ellie would. While looking through my footage, I just noticed I played with the escalators the same way Ellie did in the TV show, spontaneously. Of course, it is a video game, so you cannot do absolutely everything you can think of, but the level design places a few interesting rides that advance characterization of both Ellie and Riley. A carousel, a photo booth, playing with Halloween masks, all of those adapted to the TV. The major gadget absent from the episode are the water guns, but that makes sense as it could compromise the tone and runtime. Naughty Dog was certainly very satisfied with how this level worked, given how much they leaned into the same kind of structure for part 2. There are 3 major flashbacks for Abby that play similarly, but the most memorable one is certainly the birthday gift, as Joel provides Ellie with an amazing experience in a Wyoming museum. On the flip side, this is Joel at his best as a father, bringing joy and wonder to his new daughter. But there is also a sinister undertone. This moment could only happen by slaughtering the fireflies and preventing any chance for a vaccine. At this point, Ellie does not know how much this moment cost. She is able to appreciate it and have her imagination take her to outer space. But it is not her first time filling in some gaps in her mind, because Riley did the same for her. In a magnificent section of gameplay, the girls approach an arcade. The game inside the game, the turning, was explicitly modeled to be a Mortal Kombat spoof. In the show's podcast, Druckmann and Craig Mazin talk about it.
When we made the game, we couldn't use an existing game because we would have had to recreate it. So that's one thing, and then licensing would have been a headache, so we just never went down that road, so we made our own game.
Notice they framed the scene in the show as an opportunity to use the real thing instead of a lookalike.
Saying we had an opportunity to use the original source, the original inspiration, which is Mortal Kombat 2, and I'm like, wait a minute, we could actually probably get the rights for this relatively easy because it's Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
So it was just very cool to be able to use that. So then,
oh, now I get it. Product placement, nice. But what is left unsaid is how much superior the scene is in the game. It is a wonderful moment born out of limitations. They could not develop a full game inside the game, so they settled with what appears a second best option. But it is actually a much better option. Riley narrates gameplay to Ellie. With her eyes closed, she pretends to play the arcade while you control her, pressing the buttons as Riley narrates. There are many layers to this scene, all due to interactivity. It is not the cinematic ambition of this game that wins the day, it is gameplay conveying meaning. As Ellie has mediated contact with the game, you feel the emotional connection because the description for your button pressing comes from Riley. You and Ellie are in the same spot, but you are actually playing a game. She is pretending. But aren't all games pretending? Her imperfect connection to a world she never experienced is our own imperfect connection to the feelings and thoughts her story and her character present to you. She experiences mediation at the same time as us in this moment. For a few seconds, we are together, left behind. You cannot get that with any other art form. Interactivity creates a whole host of opportunities for video games. They can be fun and meaningful. They can be entertaining and deep. Just like any other type of art. Just like movies. You just need to not try to imitate movies so hard and focus on what is actually special about the video game format.
You win.
Fuck yeah, I win.
Not bad for your first game.
Without the similarity to movies, maybe nobody would have cared about The Last of Us in the first place. And the HBO show would have been much more difficult to pull off. Maybe not even attempted. But without interactive merits, the game would have inspired nobody in the first place. Even the famous giraffe scene required interactivity for its power. It starts breaking game mechanics expectations, setting up the stage for the surprise. Games can be adapted to other media, sure, but not without losing interactivity. And the best ambition a game can have is to be a game.